Obamacare. Then we should go past that and have a state public option, which is essentially a state level of Medicare. It's an insurance, we pay into it, and then it takes care of things at a much lower overhead with no profit consideration. I think it would beat the heck out of the private insurance companies. So that's one thing, and that's one big difference that kind of illustrates the difference between myself and Republican incumbents. Beyond that, we need, for revenue side of it, we've got to go to a couple of things, one of which is a capital gains tax in this state. Another thing is that the state legislature and administration needs to tie in with the forested counties so that we can go after the federal government to live up to their basically legal contract with all the counties that have national forests so that they start supporting schools again and some county operations, road operations, and so on, because that will relieve some pressure from the general fund. So the upshot of it is, I agree with almost everything that came up on that presentation.
That was an excellent presentation. And I think from my priorities have been actually for, and not necessarily in the order that I'll stay, but I think education, we have no choice, that has to be a priority. We've had the McCleary decision from the Supreme Court, so we have to fund basic education. We hate to define it, but we have to fund it. I think we have to take care of the most vulnerable, which this presentation was excellent, by the way. And we have to also look at taking care of jobs. You know, jobs has to be an important item in when we talk about our economy here in the state of Washington. And I don't mean necessarily state jobs. I think we have to become business friendly so businesses can expand in the state, and that we can take care of getting people back employed. As you know, we have a huge gap to fill. We still have about $1 billion deficit in the state of Washington. Well, unlike Washington, D.C., we don't have a printing press in the basement. So we have to fill that. We have to take care, as I said, of the vulnerable. We have to provide a good education for our children, and we have to provide public safety. And I think by the time that we get ourselves over there and we start working on getting people employed, we're going to see things a little bit easier than they have been in the 4 years that I've been there. So I appreciate the fact that you have put together a very good program, and you've had some very good points that we need to take some very serious concern about. Thank you.
Senator Ross. Thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you today. I'm sorry my voice is a little hoarse. I don't know if it's been the weather or if it's the flu that never seems to leave my house, and 2 kids, the perpetual flu. Wonderful presentation. I think you folks, and I find it interesting that the 56%, when the explanation of what the 56% came down at, it kind of, I have to tell you, it shocked me because I'm going to be 42 this year, I think. And I realize that I'm less than a decade from being covered by that button. Quit bragging. There's no sympathy here. But, you know, in some of the remarks from, you know, the table thus far, some of the things that we need to not do on this topic is be stereotypical about your view of how we solve healthcare going forward. I think it's very counterproductive. I don't think it serves the general taxpayer or healthcare consumer any good to say a Republican doesn't believe in healthcare versus a Democrat. I just don't see productivity in that. Over the last several years, I'm going to miss one of our members, Bill Hinkle, who I think if you've been to any of these forums, he brought a lot of knowledge to healthcare. Eileen Cody, who's the chairwoman of healthcare, happens to be a Democrat. Fantastic lady. We talked to her last night. Matter of fact, we try to stay in close connection with her because she really understands healthcare. But the point that I want to make sure you hear is that our platform last year was very simple. We had a couple of priorities. They were, number one, do not create new tax burdens to the general taxpayer. That was our number one goal, was to balance the budget without going out for a new general tax. Some of us within our caucus looked at loopholes that were useless, that served no purpose. We actually removed some of those, believe it or not, and they were driven really by the Republican caucus. The other issue that we took very seriously was trying to solve education meaningfully with reform without just saying it needs a bigger checkbook. Healthcare in my world is this. Our state has been dominated by a function of politics in healthcare, which is called the mandate. Every group comes to your state house and lobbies for them to be mandatorily covered by healthcare. Every statistic I have read over time says that when you add a mandate to the list, the costs go up for everybody. I still am baffled by this state and our inability to allow you, a consumer, to buy a health care plan from another state. I believe those are some of the things we have to engage seriously so that that dollar that we get, and when I'll show you the graph of state spending, we've been spending more money every time we write a budget than before, with one minor exception where it really wasn't less, it was almost the same. But historically, there's more money every cycle. So I'm asking this, how do you make consumers more educated and give them products that fit their needs so that they can provide for themselves? And those who can't, those who are on fixed incomes, who are depending on us to take care of them, we'll do that. We have plenty of resources. But through the process of prioritization of government services, we will fund the most essential, which is building streets and roads, putting criminals in jail, caring for the most vulnerable, which is who we believe. And the thing about keeping people at home for care, I absolutely 100% agree with you. I watched it with my mother. I think of how much resources she would have consumed at a nursing home compared to what really it costs for her to stay home. Not every family has that ability. They can't see that or have that. So nursing home care, we worked diligently to try to protect cuts to nursing home rates from the state. It was one of the few times where I actively engaged in what we saw as a tax to some folks who had health insurance. And we were going to take that money, put it in a pool, let insurances use it to compound or money match that money. And guess what happened, people? For those of you who work in the industry of nursing home care, what happened to that money, do you remember? It was taken by the state. The pool was evacuated by the state. That's what I'm always afraid of, and I just see us as the last resort. So I hope that answers some of your question. The presentation was a lot of territory to cover in 50 minutes for us to respond to, but I love hearing a qualified presentation. Thanks.
Representative Taylor. Well, thank you very much. And folks, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate the presentation. It's actually got a lot of good information. And you know, it's long-term care aging has not been it's not my background. And so my learning curve on that issue has been fairly steep. So I appreciate getting the handout and go back, look it over, and do some homework. Where's Sandy at? Where'd she go? Did she leave?
Yeah, she has a fair commitment.
Okay, well, all right, fair. Yeah, I got to tell you, I really appreciate her story. And it really, until this year, her stories and the impact of her story, it was just that, it was a story. And it was a personal story, and I appreciate that. But this year, I've had the unfortunate experience of dealing directly on the periphery, admittedly, with what she's talking about. During the session, we lost my aunt to a 10-year battle with breast cancer, and I saw the tally it took on our family. It was her parents and her sister that were taking care of her. And so you who are caregivers and you who are family members that are doing that at home, God bless you. Because if there's one thing that you may not get enough of, it's just a thanks. Because you are, as Charles said, you are providing something that, in my humble opinion, is far better than anybody in a facility could provide. We have good facilities out there, but it's always best to keep them, if possible, in their homes where they feel safe and they're comfortable. The other person was my wife's grandfather this year, and thankfully we were able to take him out of care, put him back in the home, move in the hospital bed, and his wife took care of him until he passed. And so this year it's a whole new, unfortunate experience, but for me it's a learning experience that I'm able to, I would hope, learn from and really listen to, because it's opened my eyes to things that in the past I haven't had to deal with. I'm 40. Okay, both my parents just recently retired from teaching. I've had to experience it up until now. And it's tough. It's tough. So those that are providing that service, thank you. From my heart, thank you very much. The one thing that, as far as the specifics in the booklet you handed out, with my background, I want to touch on two. The first one is protecting, on page 10, it's second bullet, it's the rights of people living in mobile homes, manufactured home communities. Of course, my background is land use, and I can tell you, based on court decisions, we are mandated to provide them the same rights and responsibilities as anybody else that lives in a single-family residence. It is simply another type of community, and we have to ensure that their rights are protected. I'm all about property rights, 110% about property rights. And if you own your structure and it happens to sit in a manufactured home park, it happens to sit in the park. You own your house, and we got to protect that. The other piece, just very quickly, is on page 8, and it's the graph. Folks, this pie chart, it's a travesty. The fact that we have a population of people in our communities that are taking advantage of our elderly is a travesty. And it is incumbent upon each and every one of us, not just as lawmakers, but as citizens of Washington State, to make sure that this doesn't happen. Okay, what are our constitutional priorities in this state? What should they be? Very simple. You look at our state constitution, 3 very basic things. Protect public health and safety, fund education, and provide for the basic education of all children, and protect the most vulnerable. Are we doing that? I don't think so. Not to the extent that we should be. We need to take care of those who I obviously didn't coin the term, but we need to take care of our greatest generation. Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Well, I don't know if I have enough bullets to shoot down Mr. Taylor's position on this. The thing is that he actually voted against the bill, what is it, 2314, on long-term and healthcare. So it's really important that I actually show you the real side of Mr. Taylor and tell you guys that he actually voted against the bills that actually is important to you guys. He was one of the 4 legislators that actually voted against it, and one of the things that I feel is really important is actually supporting your guys' cause, the cause of supporting the rising unemployment rates for seniors. My father actually faced high unemployment rates for seniors. My dad is, I believe, is my dad 65, Junior, or is he 65? Okay, my dad's 65, and he actually faced unemployment for 3 or 4 years. A lot of people wouldn't hire him because he was older and they didn't think he could rise up to the task. My dad is a hard worker. My dad, taught me a hard work ethic, and he taught me how to get up in the morning and pick apples and do all that. He was a foreman for over 15, 20 years, and he taught me hard work. And one thing that I don't like is seeing older people not being able to find employment just because of age discrimination. You find the same thing with people that are under the age, people that aren't of age to find a job. You find discrimination everywhere. You find discrimination just based on race. But the thing is that I want to be able to support the bills that are actually supporting your cause, which is, opposing neglect for people that are in the long-term care system. Finding more funding for these type of programs so that way we can invest for this in the future. A lot more people are exiting the workforce and getting into retirement. I'm entering the workforce. That means I have to be the one paying for a lot of services in the future. So I want it to be efficient when it comes my time, when it comes from my time to retire. I want it to be a good system by that time. That's why I decided to run it, because it's actually important for me to try to implement efficiency and effectiveness in the legislation that I push forward. And I don't see that type of leadership with my opponent here. So that's what I want to do. I want to have my door open and speak and be able to listen to you all and address your guys' concerns. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And all those things on the list today, I feel like I can do a much better job representing those in Olympia. Thank you. You're really making my day. I want to
thank you folks for coming out first thing in the morning. I appreciate you being willing to spend some time with us. And I wish we had a lot more time. Like Charles said, there's quite a bit in here that bears quite a significantly further conversation. I will say that there isn't a single household or a single person in Central Washington that hasn't been dramatically affected by the recession, by the economic turmoil over the last 4 years, actually 5. And I think that we really need to always start from that understanding that everyone has. I mean, people over the age of 50 have lost 25% of their net worth. Most of that's in retirement, and most commonly in retirement funds. And they have yet to make that back. There has been more than several $1 trillion lost in terms of the value of people's homes and their savings over the course of this recession. And there's just no ignoring the huge impact that has. Having said that, the state of Washington is much better positioned than most other states. And I'm always grateful that we're not California. California, I believe, will be the ultimate test of whether anything truly is too big to fail. It's the 13th largest economy in the world, and it is really following what some people call the Greek strategy. And that will have a big impact on us. But we aren't Texas. When you look at the figures of well, it was 1.7% economic growth in the last quarter. They adjusted. It's interesting. They adjusted about halfway through the next quarter, so it's never quite as positive as it was when we first announced it. But I think just this morning it says 1.3% economic growth in the last quarter. All of that occurs in the state of Texas. If you take Texas out of the union, then we lose. Then we have negative. We are in a depression. And so those are kind of the extremes in the country. We aren't doing as well as Texas, but we aren't doing anywhere near as badly as most other states. And that gives us an opportunity. And over the next 3 years, we have, I think, a window of opportunity to build a platform that will give us a real good shot at a much more positive future for the rest of the decade. I will say that there's a few problems that we face. By 2030, in less than 20 years, there will be more people over the age of 55 in the United States than there are people, than there will be people under the age of 20. That is the biggest, most difficult underlying challenge we face. And I say that because right now, every person working who's employed right now is supporting 2 people on Social Security. Now, if in fact we get to that situation I described by 2030, then there'll be each person working will be supporting 3 people who are retired. That won't happen. And I would say that we have to deal with retirement and pensions and Social Security over the next few years, or we simply are going to be engulfed in a downward financial spiral. I always find presentations on the budget interesting. I serve on Ways and Means, as does Charles, and I've been on there quite a while. I've seen them, I guess the good times and the more difficult times. It's important to keep a note. When you look at the chart on page 12, it's an interesting chart. It comes, I think, from the Office of Financial Management. It looks the same as theirs. The thing that is important to keep in mind is that we are spending more money right in this year than we spent last year. And we're spending almost as much money as we ever have in the history of the state. It is not a decline in revenue. It is that revenue is not growing as fast as it's been projected every year by the legislature. The legislature stubbornly keeps anticipating anywhere from 5 to 7% increase in revenue, and that probably won't happen at least for 3 or 4 more years. But that creates the appearance of the deficit. The deficit is the difference between expectations for both revenue and for spending. But the reality is that it isn't a decline in revenue. It's a decline in it's a gap in the expectation and the reality of revenue. And I think the most important thing the legislature can do for the people it serves is be realistic and be honest with all of you about what is really going on and what our prospects are. And the legislature has been reluctant to do that. You can talk for hours on pensions. I spend a great deal of time studying the pension system. Several things I would urge you to keep in mind. Every time the legislature changes pension law, either benefits or contribution rates or anything else, that has a bigger effect on our counties, cities, and school districts than it does on the state, because they have more employees overall around the state. They have just over more than half the employees. But one of the things that always concerns me is that the state will either suspend a payment, and that's been a bad habit over the years. It's created a $7 to $8 billion deficiency, an unfunded liability, we call it, in the pension system. And about 60% of that falls on our local government. And if we say, well, we're going to pay that off and make a big jump, the legislature can say that, but it's going to hit harder at the courthouse or the city hall or the school district office than it does in Olympia. And so we have to be real careful about that. As far as the tax system overall, I would urge you to keep in mind that I understand, but I think these things are really, really important. It's the context of what we are facing. And the fact is that we don't have, in some ways, a tax system to brag about, but at the same time, we've had one of the most stable tax systems through this recession of any state in the union. So it can be reformed, but my position is that we should not change it if it undermines that stability. So, with all that, I really appreciate you guys are always very present in Olympia, and I really appreciate that. We all do. Your information and the testimony of your lives is extremely important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to open up to questions to the audience. You can direct them to a particular member. If other members want to respond, they can respond as well. Try to limit your response to 30 seconds, 45 seconds if you can. Perhaps not the person who was initially addressed, to go a little longer. And we'll try to get as many questions as we have, and I have a couple I want to get into. Sir, state your name.
My name is Fred Beckel. I am very concerned about an organization called ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. It is an organization sponsored by the corporations, many of the corporations, led by the Koch industries. Their objective is to make state governments smoother, easier to run for the objectives of corporations. They sponsored laws
We
like...
need a question.
Yes, just this one. Stand Your Ground law, they sponsored that. The voter ID, voter suppression laws, they sponsored that. I saw in all of the registrations, all of the information I have on ALEC, I found nothing to support any senior or even objectives for people in general. We have a member of...
we're going to have to get to a question.
My question is for the member of ALEC who's sitting there. What laws did you, or what proposed bills did you get from ALEC that help people and specifically help seniors?
Who's that representative? Who's that to?
He knows who he is.
We don't.
That's it.
My name is Charles Ross. Yes, I have and oftentimes read ALEC information. And part of my job as a legislator is to be aware of issues. That's why I'm here. That's why I read their material. That's why I subscribe to their information. For every person like me, there is multitudes of places you will go to visit with other professional lawmakers. I should show you some of the mail that comes to me every month. It ranges the gamut from union issues that I receive from union magazines, and I read through them. Part of being a good legislator is understanding people's viewpoints. Specific bills that I've taken from any agency is not something I normally do. I don't take boilerplate, what they call boilerplate laws.
That's what ALEC does.
Well, and
ALEC makes boilerplate laws.
so for a legislator to attend and meet and go to summits, to go to any group where you're going to have people that do what we do or what these folks want to do, the most powerful thing you can have as a legislator is information. For example, I'm going to show you probably one of the guides that I believe has been one of the most helpful guides. I bring it to almost everything I go to. This right here is from the Washington Policy Center, of which a lot of people think the Washington Policy Center is the only focus they have is less government. I have read every issue of this that I've ever gotten from them. I disagree with that. But ultimately, the beautiful thing about a good lawmaker is they don't tell me what to do. They give ideas. If I think they're good ideas, I take them. I meet with folks that are here wearing t-shirts from SEIU. Some of their issues that we've brought forward, I completely agree with. I've told most of them in my office, I'm probably not going to be with you 100% because I don't make that commitment to anybody. One of my favorite stories is people say Republicans work for the big and the rich in corporate America. That is so not true. I'm a living example of a person who was one of the lead people in a bill to close a loophole against the multinational banks. Because the first-time home mortgage tax loophole served no purpose to the general public. We helped close that tax loophole. We helped close that. So again, like I opened, those stereotypes and trying to single out and say simply because you receive mail from an agency that you are exclusively tied to their beliefs is just not true.
Anyone else need to comment? All right. I want to ask a question. It was covered in the material and nobody responded to your response. And that is one of the central goals of the Aging Caucus this year is to have a discussion with the legislature as to whether it's time to have an aging-specific committee in one or both houses related to all the set of issues that Ingrid laid on the table, which is the dominant demographic challenge, and Representative Chandler correctly outlined it, the shift in the demographics. Is it time to have a committee of the legislature that's specifically focused on these issues to build a set of expertise in the legislature and begin to fashion some solutions? Norm?
Well, as being one of the oldest members of the House, I think I should have the honor of responding to that. I agree. I don't see there would be one problem with having a committee in the House that addresses the issues of the most vulnerable among us. Now, with that said, the most vulnerable among us, certainly the people that are up in years, but it's also people who are having to have special care that aren't necessarily senior citizens. People who live in the RHCs like we have in Selah and 3 other places around the state. Plus, I'm very concerned about the 16,000, that's an estimate, of folks that need services that are not currently receiving services. So I have been honored, have been appointed by Speaker Chop to the Select Committee on RHCs. I myself and Representative Tammy Green, a Democrat from Tacoma, and in the Senate, Senator King from right here, and Senator Klein from Seattle. And believe me, it's not an easy job wrestling with that because you have two, as this lady back here from Richland said to me earlier on, you've got two really opposing views. So, you know, I think we need to understand the vulnerable covers a whole spectrum of age. But like I say, being one of the older members of the House, I certainly feel that we could use a committee that would address aging issues and the issues of the vulnerable. I see some people around here that have worked a long time. Anita Minoyan back there, who's been national president and runs neighborhood health. I don't know what we do in this community without neighborhood health, without the farm workers clinic. We don't have enough doctors. That's one of the reasons why I've been a proponent of the new medical school here, is so that we have doctors with a mission that they're going to serve people in underserved areas. And certainly we are one of those areas. So yes, to answer your question, I would.
Spencer?
Well, I definitely agree with Norm on that one, and I think we can short-circuit this one a little bit. We just have a show of hands who agrees with the position presented about having an aging committee or commission formulated through the state legislature.
Okay. Anybody else? So that's a good answer. Like that. Other questions? What?
No, I don't have a question, but we're going to maybe have the mic so that people can hear. So, yeah, and then we'll break it.
Go ahead.
Mr. Spencer used the microphone.
Oh.
So I can pass her up.
Oh, all right. Let's get a question over here, and then we'll come back over to this man.
We have the candy and soda tax, which we lost, which provided, I think, about $300 million in revenue to the state. That was only 1 cent per candy or soda. And I think, if I remember correctly, a lot of that revenue went to help seniors. What would you do to increase income so we could provide services for seniors?
Thank you. And the truth is that those taxes, the candy and soda pop tax, was an example of the strategy the legislature's been using through the whole last decade. We raised taxes on liquor, tobacco, we raised candy and soda pop, all these things that legislators thought were not good for people anyway. Well, it ended up, we never collected the $300 million. It was dramatic, it was about half that. We instituted new fees and a few new minor specialized taxes in the last 2 years. They have not raised even half the money. That has not been an effective way for us to actually raise revenue. And I believe that when we have, the tax system we have is based upon production, which is through B&O tax, largely a property tax, and business license fees. And then we have on consumption, which is essentially the sales tax or the real estate excise tax. And I think it was mentioned earlier about the sales tax. I think it's true that we shouldn't rely upon constantly expanding consumption because we're not in a decade where that's going to happen. And quite honestly, I think this is a once in a generation shift in the approach that people take to their finances. It's not going to change in a hurry. People aren't going to go back to what they were doing in 2005, 2006. They've been burned and they're going to be much more conservative. So I do believe, and there is discussion going on, at least in the House, regarding to comprehensive tax reform. But I think that in the long run, to get on a more sustainable revenue path, we're going to have healthy businesses. And most of those are small community businesses that characterize the Yakima Valley businesses. They generate about over 60% of the state's revenue. And I do think that we need to allow for them to generate more revenue, then we'll get more revenue and won't be quite as dependent upon the sales tax, which is consumer spend.
Anybody else want to chime in? And also, it's important to note that the pop tax was repealed by the voters. There was an initiative against it. I don't think it was going to quite raise that much money, but it never really collected anything by the time we set aside
As I said in my opening statement, you know, running a government to me is much like running your household. And I really believe that we're going to have to prioritize our spending. We haven't done that. That's why I say I felt education, the most vulnerable, public safety, have to be high on our list. We know education is because we have a McCleary decision. And we have to do this much like we would our own home. So you take the things that are the most needed and you work down from there. You know, you mentioned the soda pop and candy tax. That passed the House. Did I vote for it? No, I did not vote for it. It was called a fee then. That was what separated it from tax. But a fee and a tax are pretty much the same. And that went out, and what happened to it? The voters rejected it. And the voters, I feel, at least in our part of the state, and obviously throughout the state when it came to that, are in no mood to raise their taxes. I think people are hurting. And people are sorely hurting. They need jobs. They don't need to be passing taxes, and they're just not passing them. So I think with that in mind, we have to bite the bullet, and we have to go to priorities of government.
Any other comments? Taylor.
Well, first, I think Norm's hit it right on the head here. We need to look at the priorities of government and prioritize our spending. During the presentation, there was and I don't remember what page it was on, it was basically a bullet that said we need to look, and I'll paraphrase it, but for consolidation of services. Is there an opportunity to consolidate services so you make one phone call instead of 4 to get help or get assistance or whatever it is you happen to be looking for? Unfortunately, we can take that across any part of government. We can look at people in the field and say, why do we have 4 biologists in the stream from 4 different agencies? We can look at it in aging and long-term care. Why do we have to make 4 phone calls to get one answer? We have opportunities where we can consolidate, where we can streamline a process, which will ultimately save money, allow us to reprioritize that spending back to the priorities of government, which include, as Norm has said, taking care of the most vulnerable in our aging community. You know, it's interesting because 2 years ago, there was a small group, it was Charles and I were involved in it, that worked on the tribal gaming issue. And the outcome of that was a piece of proposed legislation that actually earmarked legislation for specific areas in our budget that we believe fit the priorities of government. Education, taking care of the most vulnerable, and protecting public health and safety. Folks, we didn't even get a hearing on that bill. If we put that forward and we said this revenue, the projected revenue, and as we've heard from Representative Chandler, those are all over the board. Those are projections. We don't know where they're going to come in. But based on the information we had, it was $300 million per biennium. And we had specifically allocated and earmarked that money to those 3 areas of government service that couldn't be swept. Okay, that's very important to the discussion we're having here, because what happens, and I think it was Charles earlier, or Norm that talked about it earlier, we've had a bed tax, we've had the hospital tax, and what happens each and every year? Oh, we're short on revenue, let's sweep those funds from a dedicated account. The way we had put the legislation together was to say, you can't sweep those funds. We're dedicating those funds. In this example, I think it was $60 million every biennium specifically to aging and long-term care. There are solutions out there. It comes back to prioritization.
Let me make a comment before the next question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. You go.
Okay. Now, Bruce brought this around to revenue and budget. And let's look at a couple of things that are sort of prior considerations in my opinion. One, Washington State has the most regressive tax system of all 50 states in the USA. That's because it's based on sales tax and property tax. Sales tax, being a consumption tax, means that people of low income, seniors, etc., have to buy certain things, toilet paper, whatever you want to look at, where they're going to pay sales tax. On the other end of the income spectrum, people's actual cash purchases and so on are at a much lower percentage of their income. The other part of it is on property taxes. You might say that many of the poor rent. Well, if you're a landlord, what's one of your expenses on your income tax, or as to say the part that has to do with rental income, which I forget the schedule. But in any case, one of them is going to be taxes. You're going to figure the taxes into your rental rate and into your taxes as a deduction. So who pays? The renter. Okay? So, and the other part of it is this, B&O tax. Only one other state even has a modified B&O tax because, and that's Ohio, by the way. I think they got rid of it, in fact. But in any case, the reason that nobody else has it is because it's off of revenue. It's straight off of income. So it's an expense again at a certain percentage rate for all businesses. Well, who does that affect the most? It affects a small business that has cash flow issues in a given set of months, things of this nature. They're going to pay the B&O tax off of that instead of being able to deduct, come to a net income, and then pay taxes off of that at the end, like you do on income tax. So there's two basic problems with our system. Bruce says he likes it because it's stable. Well, I'm going to talk a little longer here because we had 3 or 4 of the Republican incumbents talking, and I'm the only one that can talk from the other end of this thing. So those two are part of the problem right there. And then the simple fact is, go back to when I was a little guy in Texas. The marginal income tax rate, top margin was 91%. Everybody should know that by now. Under Kennedy, it went down to 60-some%. I don't remember. It's gone down practically every administration since. Now we're talking federal income tax, I admit. But this is a part of the problem. And on the state level, since we don't have an income tax or a capital gains tax, we're missing out on the outfits, the big corporations, the very wealthy, who bring in the most income, okay? We're missing out. They're not going to pay enough in property taxes or enough in sales taxes to make up the difference that we should be taxing. They were rich when I was a little kid in Texas, paying 91%. They were still rich, okay?
Okay, we got to move.
Okay, good enough. I'll stop.
When Ingrid made her presentation, she made the point that our long-term care system in Washington State is both effective and efficient. I wanted to put some numbers in that for you to keep in your mind. We were ranked number 2 in the nation. Number 2 in the nation in terms of effectiveness of a long-term care system, in terms of choice and quality of the system by national analysis. We're also 30th in the nation in per capita expenditures on our system. So we've produced a very good system, and not as good as it needs to be, but relative to others, and we spend 30th per capita on it. So we're efficient and we're effective. Put that in budget terms, and we kept on the track we were in the mid-90s in terms of our institutional population versus our community care population. We would spend about $600 million more a biennium than we currently do. And your budget leaders understood all this. Gary Alexander understood all this in the House. And that's one of the reasons why the budget that came out of the House from both caucuses prioritized long-term care, went through priorities of government, and really tried not to cut here because they saw that we had a quiet reform that had already taken place in this area. So we are efficient, we are effective, and it would be good if you could remember those numbers. Let's take a couple more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Hi, my name is Bonnie, and I've been,
Bonnie.
excuse me? Oh, all right, thank you. Yes, my name is Bonnie, and I've been working with our most vulnerable in our communities for the last 15 years. I have seen many different healthcare needs that our clients have gone through, ones that, has had proper health care and some who hasn't had any health benefits at all. And my question is, the recent AARP scorecard shows that one area where Washington is scoring worse than other states is on quality in nursing homes. You gotta excuse me. Washington ranked 44th of all states in nursing home staffing turnover and 29th of all states in the percent of high-risk nursing home residents with pressure sores. Will you support legislation to address the staffing problems in nursing homes and improve quality in Medicare-funded nursing homes?
Medicaid, I think Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Anybody want to tackle that? Do you support staffing standards to improve the quality of care in Medicaid operators or paid for workers' comp? Well, if you don't feel you know enough about it, that's okay.
We've had that proposal, I think, for 3 years, and we are anxiously awaiting it to be reintroduced in December. I'm assuming that it will, and so we'll be taking a look at it. But I would like, how does that relate to the data that you were sharing?
It relates in this way, that we could spend more money in our nursing facilities to enhance the quality of our nursing facilities, and yet we would still be way ahead of the game of where we would have been had we not had the bipartisan reform beginning in '95. So the problem is, even though we save this amount of money, in the budget situation you've been facing, there's very little free money around to devote to the issue. But if we were able to, we would still be way ahead of the game.
No, I'm a little confused, but we can talk about it later.
Right. Now, I do need money. I'm surprised. Before we start to lose our members, we have one more testimonial that we'd like you to have an opportunity to hear, and we want to do that before we start to lose our members. So, Laurie, do you want to introduce our guest?
Sure.